Funding for this program was provided by the National Institute of Justice.
Hello, I'm James Wilson. Youth gangs have existed in many American cities for generations. The members, usually drawn from a single ethnic group, give unswerving loyalty to the gang and defend its turf as a matter of honor. When gangs turn to violence and crime, they create formidable problems for the police. And when some start selling drugs, the law enforcement problems are even greater. Some law enforcement officials say that gangs are establishing satellite drug distribution systems in other cities, assassinating members of other drug-dealing gangs, and permeating neighborhoods with drug-selling bazaars. Nowhere does the problem of youth gangs and drugs appear to be more pervasive than in Los Angeles. Their names dominate the graffiti all over Los Angeles. Crips, Bloods, Little Watts. They're the infamous LA gangs, known across the country for their violent criminal activity, drive-by shootings, drug dealing, and fierce turf rivalry.
As you can see on these walls that we're walking by, they're at war with a number of gangs, and a lot of gangs don't like them. As you can see on the wall here, all the black writing is the local guys in this particular gang, and they're indicating who they're at war with. And there are two different gangs that came by and crossed their placards out to tell them that, hey, we don't like you either. One is a Blood gang and the other is a Crip gang.
Disputes between gangs are serious business. There were 554 gang-related killings in greater Los Angeles in 1989.
I mean, for the people in New York, I know this coming out there, you know what I'm saying? They got gangs out there. The gangs out there ain't nothing like the gangs in Los Angeles. It's point blank, ain't nothing like LA. You know what I'm saying? We the gang capital of the world, you know. We the gang capital of the world, the murder capital of the world.
People do not join no gang because they have to. You're not forced into joining no gang or nothing like that. You see them little group of kids over there right there? All them is buddies, all them is friends. They growing up with each other. They going through thick and thin.
It's not just like a gang, you know, we're just like a family. You know, we stick in our own neighborhood. You know, we grow up together, but to you guys it's a gang, you know, to us it's just a family.
Law enforcement officials say that what these gang members describe as close-knit friendships frequently lead to dangerous crimes.
We're talking about people who kill people. We're talking about people who rob people. We're talking about people who steal cars. I mean, this is serious business now. This is real criminality. And again, we don't define gangs by way of college fraternities or sororities. These are criminal process groups.
25 years ago, there were about 25,000 gang members in all of Los Angeles. Today, there's close to 100,000 gang members.
The main difference that we're seeing today is that they're staying in gangs longer because of the drug involvement. Drugs being so lucrative that in the old days, people went through gangs as a phase, and if they were lucky, they came out the other end after doing a little time or maybe having a bullet in them, but they're still alive. Today, they're voluntarily staying in it till they're older, in the 30s and such, because of the draw and the reliance on the income from drugs.
There are estimated to be over 20 gangs that attend Roosevelt High School. 7 of them come from the Aliso housing projects. These gangs right here operate around Roosevelt High School, and these gangs right here are busted from other areas.
And my last question is...
Stephen Valdivia is the executive director of Community Youth Gang Services, an anti-gang program that targets neighborhoods and works directly with gang members and their families. Valdivia believes education and intervention is necessary before the kids get involved with their neighborhood gang. He stresses helping kids develop self-respect, self-esteem, and self-reliance.
I keep telling people to look at gangs like a disease. It's preventable. If you inoculate young people in elementary school and you inoculate their parents and you give them a booster in elementary or in junior high school and you stay with them, and at the same time you provide just regular things that people need, a little pat on the back, a little love and a little attention, and positive outlets, and a belief that the future is for them as well as others, people will do the right thing.
What is a decision? Can somebody tell me what a decision is? What is it?
Choices.
Choices. What kind of choices? We use our brain. We use our beliefs.
We want these kids to know that they don't have to join a gang. They don't have to take drugs, that there are other options and other choices in life. I think when you have a high self-esteem, you'll have respect for yourself and love for yourself. I think with all those things, you'll start making right decisions. And when you start making right decisions, possibly one of those decisions will be not to join a gang.
Okay, one couple of deals before Al gets into it. They had a kind of a standoff this morning at Jordan Downs.
256 officers are assigned by the Los Angeles Police Department to deal with gangs. Sergeant J.J. May is supervisor of a CRASH unit, an acronym for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums.
Oh, I'm real familiar with this area. I've probably been working this one here about 5-6 years. Yeah, they know me quite well. They know I don't fool around. I mean business out here. If you're gangbanging, stand by. You know, you're going to go to jail.
Law enforcement officials agree with community workers that the key is early intervention. But they also believe that once someone gets involved in a criminal gang activity, a heavy hand is essential.
You hear me?
One of the things you do is you attack the gangs as a gang. You make it so it's very unpleasant for them to keep participating in the type of activity that they've gotten the satisfaction from. You create a situation where it's no longer satisfactory to engage in this kind of conduct.
So you down with these fellas, bro? You been throwing chingazos?
These are all South Los gang members, and there was 2 here that we haven't seen recently, and we stopped to just fill out a little information card on them to find out who they were, what their street name is, where they're living at, and that just for our information. So prior contacts down the road, that we'll know who they are, who we're talking to. We just kind of like to keep tabs of who's new in the group and current things that are going on. We stop and talk to them all the time.
The 3 years in the joint probably kept me alive, because at the time I had at least 6 or 7 neighborhoods wanting to kill me, so it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, was going to prison.
Former gang member Marion Parton knows she's lucky to be alive today. The question is, how many others will be able successfully to break away from gang life?
We arrest people every day. We convict people every day. The jails are full. Kids are seeing other kids die out every day behind this gang thing. That doesn't deter them either. So I don't know what's going to stop it. We as policemen, we surely aren't going to be the ones to do it.
A gang, you're putting us, like I said, we're a family. You know, you're telling us to break up our family, you know, that's not right.
But I think a lot more people who have been through it have to come back and clean up the neighborhood, because part of the reason why the kids join is because they want to be like us, you know? And they need to be like the people we are today, not what we were 10, 15 years ago. And you got to let the legend die someday.
With me to discuss these matters are Malcolm Klein, professor of sociology at the University of Southern California, Steve Valdivia, executive director of the Community Gang Youth Services in Los Angeles, and Lauren Kramer, commander of the narcotics group of the Los Angeles Police Department. Steve, gang life can lead to death, injury, violence, drug abuse. Why, under these circumstances, do young people join gangs in such large numbers?
Well, gangs have been here for 7 or 8 decades in some cases, and every day we're seeing the formation of new gangs. What we've got in Los Angeles and in a lot of inner city areas is the we've got ripe territory for gangs to form. In other words, we've got the poverty situation, we've got bad education. Well, we've got a situation where people have given up on their future, given up on themselves. They've evolved a feeling of self-hatred, hatred among them, their own race. Blacks kill blacks, Hispanics kill Hispanics, Asians kill Asians. It's a very self-destructive behavior. It's very well ingrained. An outlet for that behavior and that belonging to this outlaw group is violence.
Is it correct to say, as a person we just heard in fact did say, that a gang is a family, that you can't break up a family?
Well, the family doesn't exist in a lot of these areas as a functional family in the normal sense of the word. We've got areas where there are dysfunctional families, and the role models are gang leaders. The role models are those kids on the corner. What you saw, they're looking down the street at the guys drinking and toking and gang banging. What we're dealing with is that there is not the appropriate or a positive role model, a positive example, or a positive setting, a positive family for them to adapt to or to even know in the first place.
What do you do about this? You said earlier that the important strategy is to prevent people from joining gangs in the first place. How concretely can you go about doing that?
Well, you can't just do that. You've got to hit the gang problem from all angles. You've got to cut off recruitment in elementary school with the infusion of self-esteem, self-respect, and that sort of thing. You've also got to re-educate the parents, or at least let them know or force them to look at what their kids are doing. You've got to change that environment. We clean off the graffiti, but we do it a little differently. We enlist the young people from the area and the residents who frankly don't want that kind of environment. So you change the environment, or at least the appearance of the environment, and you create employment opportunities for those who do want to work, and you do any number of other things that are social in action, and you pair that up with a strong law enforcement arm. You do make it uncomfortable to be a gangbanger, but at the same time you have to create a different outlet, because a lot of these young kids don't look at, well, they never see what the other options are.
And given the fact that the number of gang members has risen so dramatically, does this discourage you? Does this make you feel that you've made no progress in preventing recruitment, or would things be worse if you hadn't been on the scene doing these things?
Well, we know things have been worse because a year ago we targeted 5 areas in Los Angeles, and 4 out of those 5 areas are the only areas that are showing a decrease in gang crime. We know that we've saved a lot of young people from joining gangs. We know that we've made a lot of positive headway. Things would be worse, but you have to look at LA also as the new Ellis Island. There are gangs here for most of the free world, and for reasons of economic upheaval or political upheaval, i.e. Central America, they are here now, and they are now part of the problem. We've got Salvadoran gangs, Nicaraguan gangs, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Vietnamese, Thais, Cambodian, Samoans, Filipinos, and now we've got Anglo gangs. Kids that are coming from dysfunctional families right here in Los Angeles are joining up and they're forming street gangs. We've got white supremacist, racist gangs, and on top of that, gangs have become an accepted behavior. There's a subtle acceptability now of gang lifestyle that is permeating the media and being perpetrated by the media and being perpetrated by Madison Avenue.
Let me ask Commander Kramer, how does law enforcement cope with a phenomena that is so attractive to young people that they will join it even though they know they're running the risk of arrest, running the risk of violence, running the risk even of death? How do you attack the gang problem from a police perspective under those circumstances?
I think one of the common myths that has existed for many years is that gangs are a law enforcement problem, and law enforcement has the responsibility of dealing with the problem and the effects of the problem. But as Steve was saying, those things that drive young people into gangs are beyond law enforcement. The way that law enforcement traditionally deals with gangs is, first of all, it's absolutely essential that, as you saw in the tape, that officers be out there in the field dealing one-on-one with the gang members, knowing who they are, knowing in the neighborhoods those young people that are in various levels in the gang, those individuals that are the most criminally active, those individuals that are just on the peripheral, that can potentially be targeted and diverted by other agencies. Law enforcement has always, here in Los Angeles, both our department and the Sheriff's Department, has always been very successful in identifying and incarcerating gang members. What the community has not been very successful at is preventing young people from going into the gangs.
We saw a moment ago the sergeant who was in the crash unit say that the people out there know me and they know I'm bad news and I mean business. What does that mean in concrete terms? What does he do when he finds gang members or gang members acting in a suspicious manner? What are his options?
Well, I think that our officers are trained to treat gang members with a certain level of dignity, but to be firm with them, to be aggressive, to ensure that if in fact they are involved in some kind of criminal activity, that they go to jail, and they know they're going to go to jail. It is not against the law, unfortunately, to be a gang member. It is against the law to involve yourself in gang-type behavior and crime. We do try to collect sufficient information so that we know who the active gang members are and so that we can investigate those crimes that are committed by certain types of gangs.
Is there a possibility of enacting a law, or has a law been enacted that would make it more risky to be associated with a gang when you have a criminal record and it is known that the gang engages in criminal enterprises? Can you criminalize gang membership to some degree without trampling on essential liberties?
Well, to some degree you can. Here in California, a couple of years ago, our legislature passed the Street Terrorism Act, which in essence provides some enhancements, some sentencing enhancements for certain types of criminal activity associated with gang activity. Also in assisting a gang or involving yourself with a gang in that type of activity. How
important to gang life currently is the drug situation and drug dealing? Do the gang members stay in it because drugs really now are an important source of revenue, and if somehow the drug problem went away, a lot of the gang problem would go away, or are the two phenomena independent?
Well, they're very closely. It's a very complex situation, but they are very closely related. I think, as Steve was saying earlier, and as you saw on the tape, that there's no question that one of those new dimensions in the gang environment is the profit, the immense profits that are being realized from drugs. I think that throughout not only Southern California, but in many cities throughout the United States, we're seeing neighborhoods heavily impacted by gang members who are trafficking narcotics. Some of those are originating from Los Angeles, but many of them are indigenous to those particular neighborhoods.
Let me ask Professor Klein the question. Has the presence of crack cocaine or other forms of current drug distribution fundamentally altered the way gangs recruit and lead their members today?
No. No, the gang increase was taking place before crack even started to explode in Los Angeles.
And why did the increase?
It's an overlay on the gang situation.
Why did the increase occur then before drugs?
I don't think anybody knows that. Certainly part of it has to do with the increased availability of weapons, so the people shoot at each other more and sometimes hit more, and each hit requires a retaliation. Part of it has to do with increased racial segregation within the city. Successful blacks and Hispanics moving out, leaving those who are not successful. Part of it has to do with a vast increase in the unemployment, underemployment among young males, and there's nothing left for them in some ways except to hang around on the street corner.
So if we got rid of the drug problem,
you would not get rid of the gang problem.
And
Absolutely.
Are Los Angeles gangs deserving of the reputation of being the oldest, best organized, most threatening, worst gangs in the country? What does the national picture look like?
Certainly they're more common than in other cities. We have far more gangs, we have far more gang killings than in other cities. But the form is very much the same. The structure of the gangs is very much the same as it is in other major gang cities. They're not different in that sense from other gang cities. They're just a hell of a lot more of them.
Do gangs differ in their structure or leadership depending on the ethnic group they represent? Do Latino and black and Anglo gangs differ?
As I understand it, black and Latino look very much alike. Some difference in kinds of crimes that they become involved in, some difference in commitment to neighborhood. There's a much greater difference between those and Asian gangs, which are much less territorial, much more oriented toward property crime, much harder to infiltrate than black and Hispanic gangs that we know of.
We hear a lot about Los Angeles gangs establishing outposts in other cities. Have you seen those reports? Do you find them credible?
I've seen them. I've talked to people like Commander Kramer. I'm a skeptic. A lot of the gangs that are outside of Los Angeles are indigenous. They've started up on their own. Some of them start with a crack theme, but most of them were there before the crack explosion took place. I can give the names of 80 cities that have gangs in them, and most of those cities had the gangs before the crack explosion took place.
We also hear about the so-called Jamaican posses that have arrived in many cities. Is this a wholly an imported phenomena, or does that also have some indigenous roots?
You have plumbed the depths of my ignorance. I know nothing about the Jamaican
You know nothing
posses.
about Jamaican posses?
Would you like to continue that?
Yes, well, I'll change the subject, and we'll see if we find another area of equivalent ignorance. How should law enforcement approach the gang coom drug problem? You say that there are really two problems that are now related. Should the police focus on the drug problem and the violence problem, or should the police attack the gangs per se?
From my point of view, you attack both and quite separately. The drug problem is essentially a drug problem. The gang people are not well equipped to deal with it. The narcotics people are well equipped to deal with it. I find there's a lot of spurious relationship between crack and gangs. Yes, they're found together, but the gangs are not in charge of the crack distribution system. The dope dealers are. So I would say handle the drug problem as a drug problem. The gang part of it is not a major piece of it. I would say that whatever you do on the gang problem, you do it as criminal offense control rather than as gang control, because the more you concentrate on gangs qua gangs, the more you're feeding exactly what the gang members thrive off of, that is status and identity and belonging to this group.
So you're saying, in effect, that the gangs, given our socioeconomic situation, play a real role in their lives, and that not only would it be difficult to eliminate gangs per se, it might even be a bad idea to eliminate gangs.
No, don't misunderstand me. It'd be a lovely idea to eliminate gangs. But until you have some alternatives for those members, you're not going to do that. Gangs are a byproduct of inner city life. And unless you change the nature of inner city life, you're going to continue to have gangs.
Steve, Professor Klein has suggested that gangs and drugs have to some degree an independent existence. Is that your perception as well?
Well, drugs have always been a part of the gang lifestyle. The marijuana, heroin, reds, pills were always there, and but they used them before as more of a recreational outlet. They become more of the sub-economy, and you have to look at some of these areas that we're looking at in this tape, almost like a third world situation, where families, groups of people, individuals are literally surviving on the drug trade, much like they are in Central America. If you're going to deal with the drug, that part of the drug problem, it's more of an economic and survival question than it is a gang question. There are people who are not gang members who are making profits. There are mothers. There are a lot of Anglos that are users and sellers of the products. So it's not part of the gang lifestyle, if you will, any more than burglaries and robberies. It happens to be a matter of survival.
Let me ask the same question to you, Lauren Kramer. You've run both a gang suppression unit in Los Angeles and now a narcotics investigation team. Do you feel that these are two different problems that require two different approaches, or are they two sides of the same problem?
I think basically they're two very separate and distinct problems. However, at some point they do in fact come together. I think that one of the phenomena that hit particularly in South Central Los Angeles in the black community with black gangs in 1983 and 84 was that certain gang members who were OGs or older gangsters, more sophisticated criminals, accessed themselves to large quantities of cocaine, and in effect ceased being traditional street gang members and became dope dealers. And it was there was a natural reservoir for them in their respective gang environment to recruit young people who were in fact still street gang members to be traffickers, to be hand-to-hand dealers, and to involve themselves in a whole host and variety of narcotics types of transactions. Those are the individuals that are responsible. They are not typical street gang dealers. They have become multi-kilo dope dealers. Those are the individuals that are, in fact, trafficking narcotics to other cities.
Let me ask any one of you who happens to know the answer to the question, is there such a thing in Los Angeles today as a sizable gang that is not at all really involved in drug dealing?
Yes, there are a number of gangs that are not involved in drug
You
dealing
say
in
yes,
any major way.
You nodded no. Well, go ahead.
You've got how many gangs in Los Angeles? 700, 800 gangs in Los Angeles. You don't have 700, 800 gangs who are controlling crack distribution.
I agree, there are not 700 gangs controlling crack distribution, but in most gangs there is someone in the gang that is dealing drugs. And it is not a function of the gang per se, but it is one of the outlets. It's just like somebody in a gang might be running a prostitution ring or a burglary ring. That's what they do to make a living.
And would the gang then try to protect those of its members who are involved in that illegal activity, or is that simply a separate part of their life?
It's a separate part. In fact, we've seen situations where a killing has occurred between dealers or distributors, and we've been able to convince the gang members from those individuals that this is not a gang thing, so it doesn't require retribution. This is business, and business is business, and if you die by the sword, that's your problem.
What is your view on this?
Well, in fact, I think a real a classic example of that is many gangs will wear the color green. And the green signifies neutrality. It is, I'm not in this for colors, I'm in this for making money. We've seen this in other cities where they've gone, where there have actually been Bloods and Crips represented from different gangs, different sets actually go to other cities together to form a narcotic trafficking alliance. I think that there's no question that there is a large percentage of the street gangs in South Central Los Angeles and in Los Angeles County that to one degree or another are involved in drug trafficking. I think that one recent operation that we did, we found representatives from over 50% of the total number of gangs in our city that were in fact arrested for selling narcotics. Now, those are the majority of those are more entrepreneurial. They have received a small amount of narcotics and they're retailing it in another location.
Are you suggesting that there might be different kinds of gangs? Gangs that are in this for business, then there are gangs that are in it for the usual gang reasons, but in those gangs some people take care of business as a sideline or involved in drugs?
Absolutely. It's been referred to by a lot of terms, instrumental gangs, a variety of other terms have been given to it, but there's no question that that organizations have developed centered around the trafficking of narcotics that involve gang members.
Mac, I'm still puzzled as to why Los Angeles should be the gang capital of the world. And again, no one may know the answer, but it's not obvious as you look around Los Angeles why the problem should be worse here than in Philadelphia or Detroit or Chicago or other cities.
It's not obvious. One of the reasons is that we don't have some of the counterattacking possibilities here that Philadelphia and Baltimore and other cities have. We don't have neighborhoods here that are very effective. And that means that once gang situations get going, there's not much to keep them down. We don't have a sense of block, of neighborhood, of community here in Los Angeles.
Because of the mobility and
the lack of density and the mobility and the walls between houses and a whole series of things about life in Southern California, which is different from the usual eastern city that we think of as having gangs. Beyond that, we've had segregated black and Hispanic communities in Los Angeles for decades now, and that's a part of it as well.
Thank you, gentlemen, for this interesting discussion, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. For Crime File, I'm James Wilson.
Crime File is a production of CF Productions Incorporated, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for this program was provided by the National Institute of Justice, research arm of the U.S. Department of Justice.